member of the service. Will you please state your name and where you live?
My name is Sam Shaw. I was raised at 10 3rd Street, Hoosick Falls, New York, and currently live at 30 River Street.
I see. Were you born in Hoosick Falls?
I was born in Bennington, and at that time my parents lived in North Petersburg, and we moved to Hoosick Falls in December of 1926.
1926. Well, do you mind if I ask you how old you are so we have it for a record here?
I was born August the 10th, 1925, and that makes me 74.
74. Will you tell us a little about your life in Hoosick Falls before you entered the service? You know, tell us a little about going to school, anything of importance, history.
I lived in 2nd Ward, and of course we all started our school years at Center Street School for 4 years. And then we moved on to Main Street School, where the American Legion Post is now located. And then in 1939 I entered Hoosick Falls High School. I first became aware of the military at the end of the 1930s. As a young boy, I worked on my uncle's farm down in North Petersburg, and the Boston and Maine Railroad ran through his property. And in the summer when we were out haying, troops were being moved from Boston to Albany and Albany to Boston. And my cousin, who was 5 years older than me, I asked him why all the troop movement. And he said, we're going to war. And I said, with whom? And he said, the Germans. And that was very upsetting to me as a young teenage boy. He later was in an exempt employment, so he never did go into the service. In October of 1940, the National Guard unit was federalized. They went away for 1 year. And the popular song at that time was, "Goodbye dear, I'll be back in a year." And the young men were drafted, had to be 21 to be drafted. Well, at the time the Guard unit left, we all were dismissed from school and we went down to the armory. It was a nice, bright October day, and we watched the boys. Could you shut that off now? And so as they boarded the buses, all of the factory whistles blew. Everybody was yelling and clapping, and the buses went away and they went down to Albany. And then they formed a Home Guard unit to replace C Company in the Armory. Well, I was at the time only 15. I was a little too young to join up, and really didn't have any interest in the military at that time. So we continued on in high school. We lost our coach. His name was Doug Amy, and I believe he belonged to a unit in Saratoga. And of course, he had to leave. He was a captain, and he was replaced by a gentleman whose name was Joe McManus. He was a great coach. And in our 3rd year, I played on the basketball team. And in our 3rd year, we won the Class C championship, which at the time was quite an accomplishment. And as we entered our senior year, they did away with all sports. No more high school sports. And so a group of us from St. Mary's and Hoosick Falls went down and enlisted in the Guard, because they were going to have a basketball team and it would have given us an opportunity to play. And during that year we had an undefeated season, and we had a great time. Belonging to the Guard was like belonging to a club. No one was allowed in unless you were a member of the Guard or a member of the federal military. So it was a great year that we had. So after the new year, which was 1943, a gunnery sergeant came up from Albany at a Marine Corps recruiting station, and he talked to all the senior boys. So another young lad who was a close friend of mine, David Powell, who lived in Pownell, Vermont, and I decided that we would go down and enlist in the Marine Corps. We were 17 years old, and the provision was that we would not be called until after graduation. So in April of that year, we went down to Albany, took the medical, and passed. And because we were underage, we had to secure our parents' consent, which we both did. In May, we received word to come down and be sworn in. Well, Dave's brother, Ben Powell, was with 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal, and he wrote home and told David what it was like being in the Marine Corps, and in particular being in combat. So David said, "I'm not going because I'm afraid I'll get killed." So I said I will go alone, which I did. I went down on May 20th, 1943, and was sworn into the Marine Corps as a private, with the idea that I would not be called to active duty until after graduation. But that didn't work out. I received notice on June the 7th to report to the recruit depot on June the 14th, which incidentally was the day that the English 4 regents were given, which included me. So on June the 14th, I was on my way. I turned in my books one day, and 2 days later, I was reporting to Parris Island, South Carolina. It didn't take me long to understand that perhaps I had made a mistake, particularly when we were introduced to our drill instructor. And unless you've been to Parris Island, you have no idea what we go through. It's one of the worst experiences that I ever had in my life, and I wondered if I could ever survive. But as we got into it, I thought to myself, I wouldn't give this up for love nor money, and they'll have to carry me out of here on a stretcher, because I refuse to give up. And so in August we made it, and I then went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and I was put in a casual company awaiting assignment to the Fleet Marine Force. Fleet Marine Force is the amphibious force that did all of the landings in the Pacific Islands. And I was ultimately assigned to the 5th Marine Division. We went out and lived in tents. It was in the wintertime. We had no heat. We had no heat anywhere. It was cold, sub-zero. We had 2 feet of snow on the ground. One of our men went to Jacksonville on Liberty and had a little bit too much to drink. Came back to his tent and locked down on his bunk and went to sleep and froze to death. And it was cold. We went to bed with our clothing on, our overcoats. We lined the bunk with papers, and we stayed there until February of '44. And then we were taken to Camp Pendleton for our combat training. We remained there until August. Really was a nice base. We used to go on Liberty in Los Angeles. And of course there are many stories you could tell about going on Liberty in the war years. I sailed for overseas on my 19th birthday. Great birthday present. We went aboard a ship called the American Legion, and we sailed for the island of Hawaii, Hilo, Hawaii. Of course, we didn't know where we were going because we were never told what we were going to do or where we were going. And we landed at Hilo, Hawaii, and went up on the mountain up near the volcano on what is known as Parker Ranch. It's a huge cattle ranch that the government took over. And we had firing ranges up there, and we trained and did all of our maneuvers up there, and on January 1st of 1945, we came back down to Hilo and went aboard a ship. It was an AKA, which is basically a cargo ship. And we were the last ones on board, and there wasn't any more room. So we had to sleep on cots up under the forward hatch, which really was a good deal in that area. We sailed for Pearl Harbor, and we remained there for 2 weeks. It took quite a while to get everybody together because we later found out there were 3 divisions where we were going. We were there, the 5th, and the 4th Marine Division was on the island of Maui, which we didn't know that they were there. And then the 3rd Marine Division, I believe they were on Guam. So we remained in Pearl Harbor for 2 weeks, and then we sailed out, and the next thing we pulled into Saipan. The local company fought a great battle in Saipan. In July of 1944, we lost several of our prominent citizens and quite a few wounded. Tinian was another island which was just 2 or 3 miles across from Saipan. And this is where the B-29 bombers flew out of as they flew over Japan. In fact, the plane dropping the bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima flew out of Tinian, and it had a tremendously long runway. We sailed out of there and then went to Eniwetok, the island of Eniwetok, which is a very small island. And there, our commanding officers picked up our final orders. We sailed out of there, and after 3 or 4 days, we were called topside, and they opened the orders. No one knew where we were going up to that point. And they exposed the island of Iwo Jima, which has become very famous, particularly to the Marines. And we were given our assignments and the beaches that we would land on and what was expected of us. Could you turn it on again? We went ashore on February the 19th, 1945. Dawned a real nice day. We woke up early in the morning and we went down to the mess hall and we had steak and eggs. And I thought to myself, I know how the people feel now who are going to be executed. And I prayed that we would all survive.
Why don't you just...
I believe it was on D+4 that 28th Regiment, which was a part of our division, was assigned to take Mount Suribachi. And they took many casualties and got to the top, and on the 4th day, they raised the flag on top of the mountain. The picture has become, I think, world famous. Everybody recognizes it as the Marines raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. It was a great sight to see the colors flying up there. And we remained on the island until the end of March, and then we came off. We had taken 7,000 killed and 12,000 wounded at 19,000 casualties. And we sailed back, and again, they didn't tell us where we were going. And as we crossed the international date line, we had 2 holidays, 2 Easter Sundays. And at that time, shortly after, President Roosevelt died, and everybody's question was, well, who's going to be president? And someone said, a man by the name of Truman. And we all said, I wonder who he is, what he's going to do. So we sailed back to Hilo, Hawaii, and went back to our camp. We had the casualties replaced, and we retrained And we all thought that we were all set to go, because in the meantime, they had gone ashore on Okinawa, and that was the last island. So we knew that our next landing would be on the mainland, the islands, the home islands of Japan. And we were all prepared. And the next thing, it was in August, and I was asleep, and there was a commotion outside the tent. A man was running up and down the streets, and he was yelling, "Nagasaki has been destroyed with one bomb." And we all thought he was crazy. And there's no one bomb could ever destroy Nagasaki. But it proved to be true, and then, or Hiroshima. First bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and the second one on Nagasaki. And so shortly after that, the war was declared as being officially over. I believe in September, they signed the armistice in Tokyo Bay aboard the battleship Missouri. At that time, we were aboard ship, and we thought, sure, we were going home. But we sailed into Pearl Harbor again. And when we were in the harbor, we always got liberty. We got port and starboard liberty. So a friend and I, we went ashore, and we went to a place called the Breakers. It was a naval slap shoot where you could buy beer. And so we were coming back to the ship, and we were right there on Waikiki Beach, and 6 Hawaiian boys drove by in a rumble seat vehicle, and they stopped and they said, "Hey, Marines, you want to fight?" And my friend says, "Sure." And they jumped out. There were 6 of them and 2 of us, and they held us and beat us very severely. There was a military policeman who came by on a motorcycle, and he wanted to put us down in the brig in downtown Honolulu. But there was an elderly gentleman who was seated in a park across the way, and he came over and told him we were minding our own business. So they let us go. And we came back aboard ship, and a few days later we sailed, and again we didn't know where we were going. And we landed around the 3rd week of September in Sasebo, Japan. And we pulled into the harbor, and we went topside to get our boat assignments. And I was told that I would be assigned to the commanding officer's boat, and that he wanted to be the first boat ashore, which I didn't think too much of, because we had no idea how we were going to be received. So we did, and he said that when the ramp goes down, get off the landing boat and find some place to hide, which we all did. And we perused around the area, and we didn't find anybody. And we never had a bit of trouble with any of the Japanese. And then we moved on in to Sasebo. It was a city of 1 million or so people. In the entire downtown area, there was not a building left standing, except right in the middle of the city, there was a smokestack. And this had all been done with fire bombs, not a building left standing. We secured Sasebo, and then many of us were transferred to the 2nd Marine Division in Nagasaki. And I was there for a couple of weeks and had an opportunity to look at the city and down where the bomb was dropped. And then, because I played basketball, I was transferred to a regiment, had a basketball team, and it was up in the mountains. And from that point on, that's all I did. We practiced basketball, and we played different teams from naval teams and so on. I had really a good time. I almost hated to see it end. But in February, we sailed for home. We were out in the China Sea, and we picked up a storm, and I thought we were going to sink. The boat would rock port to starboard, it would go right over, and you could almost walk up on the bulkhead. So we survived the storm and landed in San Diego. And I called home, and my grandmother was quite ill. And my mother said, I wish you could come right home. So I said, get a hold of Cal. He was the Red Cross man, and they would authorize a furlough. I said, you have to send me money because I don't have any money. And they did, and I got a 15-day delay en route leave, and I came home. And then I went down to Bainbridge, Maryland, and was discharged as a corporal in the Marine Corps on April the 4th, 1946. I came home, and I went to work in the wood farm. I had worked there prior to entering service, and so I would go right back. I had a pretty good job. I ultimately became a beater over there, but I didn't like factory work. I enjoyed the men I worked with, but I thought I could do something a little better. So I had an opportunity to go to work for the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. And I joined the company on February the 21st, 1949. I worked 33 years. I had an agency, and I retired at my age of 56. After that, I did a little assessing for the town of Hoosick, and then for 8 years, I collected the school taxes for the Hoosick Falls Central School. And since that time, I haven't done much of anything other than to live in Florida for 15 years and thoroughly enjoy my retirement. That is my life.
Yeah, that wonderful story. Now, you had 2 children, or?
I have 2 children
Right.
Who live in Atlanta, Georgia.
They both live down
They
there?
both live in Atlanta, Georgia.
I see. Well, is there anything else you can tell us about Hoosick Falls now that, you know, we've heard your service, and we know you've worked as a agent. In fact, I took out insurance with you, I know
Yes, you
that.
did.
And could you tell us anything else, your views of Hoosick Falls, or things about Hoosick Falls that come to your mind just off the top of your head?
Well, of course, I have always enjoyed living here. I started my metropolitan career in South Troy. It didn't work out too good for me. I was not a man for South Troy, and so I came up here, and I enjoyed a moderate amount of success, and I've always enjoyed living here. It's a typical small town. I think everybody knows everybody. In fact, they probably know each other's business. It's just a typical small town. So.
You were active in American Legion, I understand, too,
Yes,
weren't
for
you?
a number of years. And for 15 years, a man by the name of Ed Brennenstuhl and we put the individual flags on the veterans' grave. And we would put out 550 flags every year. And then Ed passed away, and I lost my interest in it, and now somebody else does it.
Was there any other fellas that you met while you were in the service from Hoosick Falls, or was it blank all that time from Hoosick?
Yes, Lynn Chapman, he was quite a well-known musician. He played in the 5th Marine Division Band, and I used to go over there and I'd see Phil, and I met, and the leader was Bob Crosby, Bing Crosby's brother. He was a lieutenant. I was able to meet him, and several of the other musicians who were quite well known at the time. I neglected to mention there were, I was on Iwo, Lynn was on Iwo, a man by the name of Bob Burns was on Iwo, and Harold McLucas. He was really a very fine musician. He was in 4th Marine Division, and he was killed on D+7, and the rest of us made it through okay.
Well, if there's no more, I thank you very much, Sam. This is great and interesting as can be, and thank you very much for your time.